Well, good morning. We're here on a raw November day. Both my horse and I have on our winter clothes. So if she doesn't look quite ready for prime time, that's why. She lives out in the shed. She likes it there. And I don't blanket. Usually I'll let them grow their own coat. So she probably doesn't look quite ready for prime time, and that's her excuse. And as for me, I got no excuse. What I'm going to do today is something I said I would never do, but hopefully this will still prove useful. This mare does not have a problem with moving when I mount her, but I would like to do a little bit of a video on how to address that problem if it exists. And because I'm such a stickler for that, I just don't have a horse on the place that won't stand pretty well, which I guess is a good problem to have. Maybe at some point at one of the clinics or when somebody comes to visit, we can get some footage of a horse that does want to walk away. But general principles. First of all, always go back to basics. If your horse isn't standing like this, then you may as well forget getting on. You also don't want to get on straight out of the box. I walked this mare maybe 200 feet from the barn after I cinched her up, pulled her girth again, so she's not going to be cinch bound. She got her legs moving a little bit, but she's also standing still. She's showing the patience that it takes to put up with a guy like me getting on. I used to be incredibly unsympathetic to people who had trouble stepping up on a horse. I just didn't understand why you would not be able to get on, or why you would want to ride a horse when you couldn't climb up on them. Well, I tell you, the passage of birthdays changes that way of thinking, and I have learned that gravity plays no favorites. And I'm no exception to that, and I don't get on as easily as I did, even being a tall guy. One of the other cheats that I'm indulging in today is this mare is only about 14, 2.5. She's little, probably too small for me. And she's pretty sturdy, so she's not going to cave over on me, and she's probably going to stand still, and my hurdle's not real high, but I'll take all those advantages if I can get them. What I'm not going to get into is how you use a mounting block or how you get your horse to step up to a mounting block. That's been done very well by a lot of people. I may do something on it at a later time. Frankly, I don't really have a program. My horses, if I need to get them up to a muck bucket, which I use to step on sometimes, they just kind of do it because we have this on them. And we got these other basics to where if you need to move them around, they're going to move around. And you can maneuver them to where you need them. So what we're going to do today is just kind of show a couple of things you might do if you got on your horse and they wanted to move off. First of all, it's probably worthwhile to analyze how we're going to get on a horse. There are different ways. When I used to ride a lot of horses of questionable temperament, let's say, I used to routinely get on up in this region, and I'd have their head doubled over, and I would pivot off my knee so they couldn't kick me in the guts with their hind feet or paw me with their front feet. And I sort of don't like admitting that I was getting on horses like that these days, but that was what I was riding at that time, and there seemed to be a certain demand for young guys who weren't afraid to die. I'm neither of those two things right now, and I'm trying to ride horses that will fill in for me a little bit if I need it. So what I've done is I've moved myself back a bit, and I'm getting on more in the middle of the ship than up here at the bow. So I'm going to get her over here just a tad to where maybe you can see better. So I'll flip my stirrup, put my foot in, and I'm still up here in the middle of her. I'm not back there at her flank. This is mechanically disadvantageous to me. If your horse moves, you're just sort of hopping on one leg trying to catch up. Here, at least, if your horse moves, you've got a shot. Now, the first thing you got to do is accept the fact that you got to get some vertical push. So you go up. So you need to get up to about there. And you can see that more than maybe I did 20 years ago, I'm prying her off to the side a bit. It's surprising how a horse will learn to compensate for that if they know that's just part of the deal. Now at some point, it becomes too much to ask of them. So the rest of the process is you pick up your foot, you go vertically, and then you kind of dive over your horse to where you get that upper body headed for the other side, and mechanically that will build you some momentum to help the back half of you go over the horse. So here you go, over and up. The other thing is, I'll do this in reverse. Don't try to get on and off your horse with your leg like that. Anybody old enough to remember Chester on Gunsmoke, he had a stiff leg. I don't think his knee bent at all. And he'd hobble around, and when he'd get on a horse, I suspect it was like this. And what you do is, you'd have to have really good hip flexors to make that work. Otherwise, you're really stressing yourself and you're bumping your horse in the backside. What you do instead is, you just bend your knee. Why a certain component of people don't think of that, I don't know, but believe me, people get into habits, and maybe you have. If you have, just do this, bend your knee. How much easier is that? And then you're off or on without bumping your horse and without having to do that sort of physical therapy level movement with your hip. So what if your horse, despite doing things mechanically correctly, wants to move off? Well, one thing that can happen, and this is particularly true with young horses, they can be standing in a way that is not completely balanced, and it makes it harder for them to help you get on. So what I'll do with them, number one, some horses, when you pull, they move. So I'll pull and not move them. Now watch her feet. Okay? Now that's actually a better position for the horse, because she's a little spread out, her base of support is wider, and at the same time she's gotten used to being yanked on and not walking off. So she's learned that maybe this old guy's going to pull on me a little bit. So from this position, you can step on, and you've got your horse desensitized to you pulling on them a bit. They're used to having that weight pulling off the side, and they also have their feet in a better position. Now, I just squared my saddle up because it'll often go sideways a little. A lot of horses immediately take that as a cue to move, and you can see she's wiggling her feet just a little. If you want your horse to stand when you get on him, stand for a while after you get on him. A lot of times, standing still is a really good option with a horse, and it's underused. Now, if your horse is really wound up or just moving forward too much, a couple of things you can do. Depending on the horse, and this is why there's no cookbook for this stuff, depending on the horse, you may say, okay, you want to move, I'm going to move you. And shift them around, maybe move them around you like that, yield their hips, move them around a bit, and say, it would really be easier for you and for me if you stood still. And while it would be more illustrative if this horse wasn't standing still, I think you can tell she's had this sort of thing done to her, to where she knows that her reward is to stand still. And guess what? She's going to be easier to get on this time if she was a problem. That doesn't always work. If you have a horse that's really forward, my wife's big mare, Lily, very forward. You'd go to get on her and she was just ready to go. She was moving. So what I did with her and what I do with some horses is, I'll take that forward motion and redirect it. Now, you don't want to have a horse that is cold-jawed and doesn't respond. But I'll tell you what, this is work for a horse. And I'm putting a little pressure on her face, moving her back end around. And creating a situation where, once again, the reward is standing still. Now, do you do that with every horse that maybe is a little restless? You wouldn't do that with a horse that wanted to rear up. In fact, you probably ought to address that before you step on. You wouldn't want to do that with a horse that had a tendency to fall back. So you could take that and use it and turn it into a bad thing if you backed your horse to where that became their default. Because it's just as miserable getting on a horse running backwards as walking forward. So you study your particular horse and you decide which thing is going to work best. Final thing that I would recommend in getting your horse better to get on is work on getting on after they've already been worked. Now, the logical question is, well, I got to get on the son of a gun in the first place. How do I do that? And the answer is however you've been doing it. If you're using a crane, if you're using a block and tackle, if you're swinging on a rope, if you got a whole posse of people kind of earing this thing down so you can get on it, do that. If it's get on the horse. But after you work the horse, then go through this routine when the edge is off. And then move that starting point back to where you can do it earlier in the ride and then at the beginning of the ride. What really is unrealistic is to expect to have a whole gang of people there to help you every time you get on. Somebody to push your backside, somebody to hold onto your horse, somebody to sit off to the side and say prayers. That's probably not the best approach. The other thing, if you can do it, is to retain the ability to step on a horse without using a mounting block. We do a fair amount of trail riding, and for a variety of reasons, there are places on the trail where you need to step off, and you may or may not have a mounting block of sorts available. We ride enough through woods that if we get off and either of us, my wife or I, need to use something, there's usually a stump or a log or a big rock, and it works out fine. But both of us can step on our horses without that help. And I routinely do. Her mare's really tall, and she's not that tall, so she doesn't necessarily, she's got her horse pretty well stump broke. But that gives you a little bit more safety if you're out there. And if you were out on the Great Plains and there's no big rocks and there's no stumps around, well, you better have a plan B, or you better make sure you don't get off your horse. Better, if you can, to work on loosening yourself up, making your horse reliable to get on, so that even if it's a little awkward when you need to, you can step on your horse without a mechanical device. So those are just some thoughts. I will supplement this if I can at some point when I have a horse that needs to learn to stand when you get on. But this gives you some thoughts as to what you could do if you do have that problem with your horse. Hope it helps, and if you like this, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know what you don't like about it. And please either like or subscribe or get notified that we're doing these videos, because we want you all to stay with us. Thanks.